Hi all, and welcome back to the neighborhood. I've got the Moondrop Variations in the house for review thanks to Atmos Audio. Unlike others, I wasn't a huge fan of the Blessing 2, and the Variations is Moondrop's next step up from that set. So will the Variations live up to the hype, or disappoint like its predecessor? Let's get into it. From a superficial perspective, upon first glance, the build of the Variation looks strikingly similar to that of the Blessing 2. But unlike that IEM, which I found to fit rather awkwardly and be rather chonk, the Variation somehow does not cause me any fitment issues like the Blessing 2 did. It seems to be slightly slimmer in its overall construction, and its nozzle appears to be slightly trimmer, smaller, and or angled better. I'm not really sure, but these ergonomically fit my ears like a glove, where the Blessing 2 did not. Moondrop claims the shell material is composed of a 3D printed medical grade resin with a skin-friendly texture, and with regard to the latter, I concur. My skin tends to be somewhat sensitive to certain materials at times, especially over the course of long listening sessions, but I never ran into a problem with the Variations. So whatever type of skin-friendly resin the Variations is made out of, it does the job for my ears, and it is the furthest thing from irritating. The standard gray silicone ear tips these come with were also comfortable and were a solid choice from both a fit and auditory perspective. The outside faceplate of the Variations is a sandblasted stainless steel in a matte finish with a repeating cube pattern and the Variations logo printed across the front. The connection at the base of the IEM itself is a slightly recessed 2-pin, and the copper cable terminates in a box-style 4-pin connection. Moondrop supplies 3 right-angled adapters as accessories that make use of this box-style connection: an unbalanced 3.5mm connector, a balanced 2.5mm connector, and a balanced 4.4 Pentagon connector. The proper way to connect these connectors to the cable is to align the arrow with the 2 hash marks on the inside of the right angle of the connector. Unfortunately, this is not outlined in the materials that came with the Variations, and I had to locate this information on the web. For an IEM at this price, I think Moondrop should have made this information abundantly clear, as I wouldn't want a novice customer to risk potential damage to their new baby if they plugged it in incorrectly. Inside the shell is a 10mm LCP, a liquid crystal polymer diaphragm dynamic driver handling the low end, 2 soft ears balanced armatures dedicated to the mid-range, and 2 Sonian electrostatic drivers as the high-efficiency tweeters managing the top end. The IEM also comes with a leather flask-style carrying case, which is a bit large and a bit thick for my taste, but functional to protect the Variations as an investment nevertheless. With regard to power requirements, scaling does occur with higher end amplification, but I enjoyed the Variations to a different extent off almost everything that I tried it on. However, the more power one provides the Variations, the more engaged and lively its liquid crystal polymer diaphragm becomes, and the more authority and texture it develops. I enjoyed the Variations most powered by the Gold Note DS10 Plus and driven balanced off the THX AAA 789. Presentations between these two amplifiers were somewhat unique from each other, however, in that the tones of the Gold Note were richer and additionally dynamic and more musical, while the 789 was tighter in its overall presentation, additionally forward in its vocals, and more delicate in its note weight, and generally more leading in its edge. But generally speaking, the Variations is quite the achievement for Moondrop. As I already stated, I wasn't a huge fan of the Blessing 2 due to its timbre issues, thin brittle presentation, and other shortcomings, but in contrast this thing, the Variations, is on point. Again, no matter its power source, I loved it. Obviously, it benefits from high-end amplification, but it sounds great off my phone, even better off the BTR3K, and impeccable when driven by desktop amplification. And while some might balk at the price of the Variations at around $550, I actually think its versatility and adaptability might be one of its greatest features or selling points, as it adds value in that one can build up their rig around the Variations as they grow as an audiophile. People will often spend more than the cost of the variations by purchasing multiple IEMs while chasing the dragon that is the magical sound of their preference. For those that want a safe bet for their money, or a one-stop shop kind of IEM, look no further than the Moondrop Variations. Both resolution and detail excel beyond the price point. Timbre is relatively neutral, with a kiss of underlying analog warmth. Note weight is mostly well weighted, but slightly lean depending upon source. Cohesion is mostly good, but one can hear differentiation amongst the Variations driver sets if they listen hard enough. If I had to grade it in this category, I'd give it an A-. In this way, the Variations reminds me of a well-implemented but not perfectly matched three-way speaker. While I never observed perfection with regard to the driver integration, driver coherence did vary from source to source and was better on certain sources than on some others. Beyond its mild struggles with coherence, the Variations also displayed some weak points within its soundstage. In particular, the Variations isn't very wide as an acoustic image, and separation, although very good, was not always excellent compared to other sets commensurate with the Variations' cost. Having said that, there is good height to the image, and depth of the sound field was absolutely superb and even expansive to a certain extent on certain tracks. Additionally, image placement and instrument distinctiveness were also readily apparent to the listener and strengths of the set. So the Variations errs towards intimacy, but will surprise you with the sheer scope of its stage every now and then depending upon the song. One major criticism of the Blessing 2 that I had to do with the competencies of its dynamics, or lack thereof, as they were rather limited and underwhelming dynamically. In contrast, dynamics on the Variations are much better than that of the Blessing 2, and more than satisfactorily sufficient. If I had to nitpick though, I'd say that microdynamics aren't as expressive as macrodynamics. Still, microdynamics were improved with the use of an s.s.r. cable to a certain extent, so cable adjustments could result in better balance to your ears. With regard to its sound profile, while the low end of the Variations was rather source dependent, I also noticed that its bass reproduction appeared to vary additionally based upon the track, and appropriately so. At times, it hides in the background, and in other instances comes forth with dominance and a vengeance. It's not the most detailed bass in the world, but it does well in terms of implied detail. So one can intuit the bottom end information rather easily, even if there is some mild diffuseness to its presentation overall. Low end extension is also good, and these can rumble with the best of them, off the right source and on the right track that is. Overall, I'd say the bass of the Variations is well-mannered, but also juicy and thick. The mid-range is relatively even-sounding throughout the entirety of this portion of its frequency response, with just enough energy to maintain interest without adding any particular kind of artificiality to the recording. Still, the Variations is rather analytical sounding, and its style of mid-range performance contributes to this, as does its treble. The treble isn't overly crisp, and there is some mild crashing here or there, but this crashing is relatively low in presence, so it really doesn't offend. I think most people won't even notice this particular observation, but it's still worth mentioning for those that will. With regard to their air, these aren't particularly airy per se, but I think there will be enough air upstairs for most listeners. Treble heads may be disappointed with the Variations, as there is a certain rounded character to its upper end performance, but the Variations still more than gets the job done in the treble department. Audiophiles with reasonable expectations of treble performance likely won't be dissatisfied. Vocals aren't particularly stand out on the Variations, but really give what the track gives to them. Meaning that vocals were mostly track appropriate in their presentation and impressed when they were meant to, and didn't when they were unexpected to do so. Neither underperforming nor coming across as over-accentuated in any particular manner. There's limited to no indication of shoutiness and absolutely no sign of sibilance. Overall, I would characterize the vocal performance of the Variations as well articulated, but smooth and with a softer touch. It draws to mind imagery of listening to singers during a quiet midnight stroll in the moonlight. The best comparisons at this point in time, in my humble opinion, are the Final Audio B3 and Moondrop's own Kato. Let's start with the Kato, as that will be more straightforward and requires less attention. Simply put, the Variations has the upper hand in separation, detail, depth, and resolution, but isn't as cohesive sounding as the Kato with its single dynamic driver. Both can have a similar sound signature and stage, and I would say that the Kato gets you at least 85% of the way to what Variations can accomplish for a fraction of the price. But the Variations is more suave, sophisticated, expressive, and simply put, just a better overall performer, potentially justifying the difference in its price. Comparing the Variations directly to the Final Audio B3, the most notable difference is that the B3 scales slightly better, but the Variations has the edge when being driven off most lower end amplification, at least when it comes down to resolution and separation. Regarding staging, the B3 wins hands down, as it presents an auditory image with a much grander and more dimensional stage. As a result, the Variations feels more claustrophobic on busier tracks. In terms of note weight and delivery, the Variations have a softer delivery, and there's less blending of musical tones in the Variations. But the Variations is also less romantic and less musical sounding compared to the B3. Needless to say, the Variations is more low and capable due to its dynamic driver, but I still think the B3 does BA bass well. Ultimately, these two IMs trade punches with each other. Both are excellent, and I'll be sad to send the Variations back to Atmos when my time with it is done, but the B3 will hold me over in its absence. So to wrap things up, the Variations may not wow those that seek particular aspects of performance, as the Variations is more impressive to its listener when they consider and listen for the sum of its parts more than any specific outcome. Still, like A Girl Next Door, when viewed in its entirety, the Variations is more impressive and will capture your heart. It certainly has taken mine. All the more so, I view it as a value buy even at its rather expensive price. Its mid-range performance is fascinating, its treble outstanding, and its bottom end fun and engaging without ever going overboard. Nevertheless, it is rather analytical sounding in the end, and those who seek a more musical presentation may enjoy other similarly priced in-ear monitors such as the Final Audio B3. In any case, my ears are thankful for this opportunity to audition and review the Variations thanks to Atmos Audio, and I'm excited to report that there is finally something else that I can enthusiastically recommend in the price range. And before I go, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. There's also an Instagram, Discord, Twitter, www.InToItReviews.com, and a Patreon if you're interested. Links will be provided in the description below. And with that, I'm out for now.